how you doing? Nice to see you today. My name is Dustin Cormier, and you're watching How to Rock Astrology. Today, we're in the wiggity waggity wiggly, wavy gravy, wobbly 8th house. An interesting placement for Pluto, all things considered. Continuing in our series, talking about the outer planets as keys to transformation, particularly focusing on Pluto. We are now at the part of our book where we're talking about Pluto in the houses. So if you're watching, if you want the goods on Pluto in the 8th house, you're in the right place. You don't need to watch the start of this series. But if you are interested in more about all things related to Pluto, what Pluto means in the chart, and how you can best use any interpretation of Pluto in the houses, look up the video at the start of this series, Pluto in the houses, and if just in general, if you want to learn more about this stuff, check out the rest of my Astrology Karma and Transformation series. But for now, this video specifically is for anybody who wants to learn about Pluto being in the 8th house. Pluto in the 8th house is significant because they say that Pluto is a higher octave of Scorpio, which is the 8th sign. Pluto deals with absorption, transformation, in a certain way, the end of things, death, rebirth, regeneration, death of the ego, the battlefield of the soul, the sacrifice of the soul on the cross of matter in order to obliterate those neuroprograms which stop us from perceiving the full bliss and potential that we have in our spirit and in life. Neuroprogramming is such a key word for all things Plutonian, and it happens to also be a key word for all things Scorpionic, 8th house related. Psychic complexes, confrontations in our psychic complexes, our capacity to deal with such confrontations. These are all going to be expressed through the health of the 8th house, and any aspects to the 8th house lord, or any malefic or benefic planets in the 8th house are all going to alter our capacity to grip and come to grips with things related to the 8th house, which is always, the 8th house relates with giving our energy to other people and investing our energy in partnerships. 7th house is our ability to deal in partnership, to relate, to talk, to speak, to communicate, to understand, to empathize. With the 8th house, we're dealing with the 7th from our 2nd house, which is our sense of values and the things that we hold on to as resources, as values, as our own resources, our own material needs and security and emotional wellness. And even the psychological resources that we have to keep us abundant and working in positive relationship with other people. When we have Pluto in the 8th house, we might have an obsessive desire to meet with people in order to do the convergence of resources, but that has nothing to actually do with shared values. That doesn't bring a sense of value based on what we want in a relationship. We might just get into a relationship just because we want to incite the fusion of power with another person's resources. What happens, we get another person's resources, but now their conscious influence is playing on our pool of financial resources, and this could be a very annoyingly unstable thing. And you, having Pluto in the 8th, might be very sensitive to the wobbly feeling of, oh, damn, now I've let someone into my basic sense of finances. You could, something as simple as giving your lover your debit card and noticing that you've got money slipping out, you don't know where it's coming from, and your lover is too embarrassed to say that it's them spending foolishly your money without contributing. And now you've just got this paranoid experience that you might have early on in your life, so that later on, it might have just been a simple, silly thing that happened when you were like 9 years old with your first relationship, but this could carry through in the rest of your life where you feel a distinctive paranoia when it comes to fusing your resources or your directives or your livelihood with anybody else, in partnership with anybody. feeling suspicious anytime there's an opportunity or a compulsion to merge in a group with other people and their responsibilities and what they want to do, their creative pursuits, their energies. Even investing emotional, physical, financial energy into anything. You might have had experiences in your life which make you suspicious to do that. And this suspicion can be a positive thing. It can stop you from getting in bad relationships with silly things, and you might have learned the hard way of what makes a good, valuable relationship. When Pluto is positively aspected in the chart, it's got aspects to Venus, Jupiter as benefics, or benefic moon if the moon is benefic, or if it's associated with the 5th house lord, the 9th house lord, or if the 8th house lord itself, the planet that rules the sign Pluto's in, if that planet is well placed. These are all things that give you the capacity to grip the tension that comes from the frightening moment when unstable resource vessels are sharing hands and exchanging resources and building groups, building communities, building projects that are trying to come on its own 2 feet but need commitment. It's the commitment to groups that is going to cause you to spend money, and you could either waste a lot of money on something unfruitful or put a lot of money into something that isn't fruitful materially but gives you the spiritual understanding that it's worth letting go of your resources, even if you lose from this 8th house thing. The more important thing for a positively aspected Pluto in the 8th house is to employ the faith and trust that you can merge resources with other people in a group, hold to that group, hold to your responsibility, your appointments, dedicate to it, commit to it in the single pointed way, the obsessive way that Scorpio does to a lover or to any project that it ambitiously goes towards. If you can still, after all the distrustful things that might happen with you in relationships, if you can still understand the power and employ it consciously, the power of shaking hands behind closed doors, meeting with powerful people, if you want to, if you want to get in, work in a restaurant, you need to know that it's all in who you know. Sometimes, it's not a matter of how nice you are, how good you are, how much you have to offer. Sometimes it's just going to the guy who owns the restaurant, finding out through some people power who he is, finding out who his friends are, talking to one of his friends, making an impression on them, and getting them to talk to the boss in order that you can work in that restaurant you want to work in. This is an 8th house sort of thing that you ought to be able to be willing to do. To meet people and to merge with people at the level of power and moxie and confidence. The more you can build that up, the more of a reputation you have, the more power you have to deal in groups, which is what this Pluto is learning to be able to do. To deal in groups, to invest in groups, while also taking care to keep investing in your own sense of financial well-being, your own identity, your own emotional resources, the people in your life who support you, who are close to you, who provide you with the energy that you need to go out and merge with other larger groups. Right? This 8th house, whatever your 8th house is where your Pluto is. And the Pluto always looks for the goal of the 7th from its position and tries to integrate it. So you have this obsessive need, this compulsion to be spread thin by working in a group and investing in a group and not being discerning about it, not thinking of how your values relate to that group effort. Pluto's going to compel you to do that. And eventually, what it's going to be asked, after you've done that enough and wasted time, you're going to be discerning about who you interact with. And you're going to start to find partners, to look for partners, to demand in relationship that your resources are also a priority. Your sense of individuality, your sense of your own value, of what you're bringing to the table. Your own job, your own family, all the things that give you a feeling of foundation in your life. You will eventually, through investing in the wrong relationships that aren't fulfilling, you'll find relationships that open you up to offering what you are and what you have in relationship in a balanced way. It's still Pluto. You're still going to sacrifice some of your own world, your own second house, in order to invest in the group project. That's what Pluto's calling you to do. But the best of Pluto will be a blend between these two, keeping to your own financial needs while also surrendering your financial wealth and energy investment and emotional investment and passion into either partnerships, marriage, business partners, a company, a job, a band of musicians, what have you. So that was my own sort of spiel on it. Now we're going to read from Stephen Arroyo's Astrology Karma and Transformation. It's the classic book giving us a sort of roundabout description of what it means to have Pluto in the 8th house. When we read this description, we must consider, Stephen Arroyo always says, that this is just a hint and a guideline for interpreting the meaning of Pluto in this house, the 8th house. No planet is either succinctly good or bad in any house. In fact, even though the 8th house is an interesting synergy, most planets are considered that they're not doing well in the 8th house. It's unless they're well placed, and unless the 8th house lord, the planet that rules the 8th sign in the house, in the chart, if these are well placed and good, there will still be instability, because working with groups of people implies instability. So having a good 8th house and a good 8th house lord and positive aspects to Pluto in the 8th, you will still feel instability. You will still have to sacrifice, surrender your health and your time and your routines and your loved ones and your commitment to your loved ones. You're going to have to sacrifice a lot of that energy into this group project. But if Pluto is positively placed, you will eventually gain a lot of regenerational energy where you can deal in relationships and business partnerships in this way, in a very good way, so that it actually does give you more than you put in. If Pluto is bad, you're still going to be forced to go into groups, but you'll get more and more suspicious of them every time. And it'll cause a trauma that just makes you hate having to deal with any investment in anything. It'll make you not want to, but Pluto will always force you to. It's just a matter of seeing the planets that are obstructing your ability to relate properly. Whatever is your 8th house lord, whatever is, if Saturn is square to Pluto, what is the obstruction there? This is what you should be talking to your astrologer about, to help you loosen your grip on the way you deal with resources with other people. So Pluto is not inherently bad in the 8th house. It will always be unstable, but it is the positive aspects to Pluto and the 8th house lord that are going to show whether this instability ultimately turns out to be a constructive capacity to hold engagements, to hold groups, to hold organizations together, even when everyone's splintering and falling apart and not wanting to hold the group. A person who has Pluto in the 8th will say, it's okay, everybody, we're going to get through this. We have all shared in the value of this group, and we're going to get through this. I'm going to hold it down. Pluto in the 8th has that kind of, I'm going down with the ship. And just when the ship is about to sink, when all hope is lost, when there's nothing left and the group is completely obliterated, the last penny, the last grain of sand being held by that group will be the Pluto in the 8th person, who will say, I'm not letting this go because it's still worthy of something, and they can hold it on to it for months while everyone else goes out and does some other thing. But after a few months, they'll start putting out some letters and saying, hey, everybody, do you want to bring this thing back together? And everyone will come back again. And that holding on to that unstable thing might end up being worth it in the end, right? And it could be a marriage. Lots of things can take on this quality. Depends on the placement, the context of the Pluto, right? You can't just read whether your Pluto's good in a cookbook way. So enough gabbing on my end. Let's read it from Stephen Arroyo. This is Pluto in the 8th house. Pluto in this house reveals a compulsion to influence the world through the use of power, whether through socially approved channels of authority, like being a politician or like a leader of some sort or a CEO, or through deep psychological forces or occult power or mob, gangster, aggressive mammal tendencies. There can be an inclination towards manipulating others and toward insisting that others change themselves according to this person's values. Right? It's the obsessive desire to integrate the second house into one's relationships. I value people who are like this, and you ought to be that way. So the Pluto is not aligning itself properly in that case. Like those with Pluto in the 6th house, this person will do best to let others simply be themselves and to concentrate on learning how to use power for his or her own personal transformation, not for trying to transform others, because by transforming everybody else, you lose your own transformation to fit the group. You should be transforming to fit the group. Again, just don't let yourself get taken advantage of. That's the fine line in this axis of Pluto. There are often painfully compulsive experiences in the area of sexuality with Pluto in the 8th house. The key to the resolution of this entire complex is that the person needs to totally reorient his or her use of all power, physical, mental, social, emotional, and spiritual. To reorient their use of all power completely. Whether it's self-fulfillment that brings the confidence to have power and energy, whether it's actual gripping martial law realities, pushing by force, or even by seductiveness, Even something as simple as two musicians who both have Pluto in 8th house, they're in different bands, and they want to have the social prestige of being the hot one, the hot egotism character, hoping that all the girls love me for all my power, but darn, this guy's getting it better than I am. How's that possible? That kind of silly, petty jealousy sort of thing can operate through the 8th house as well. And you've got to learn what it is that you can fulfill within yourself that's going to clip out the need for that compensatory attitude. So next up we have Astrology, a Cosmic Science by Isabel M. Hickey. This is to add more content to our reading of what Pluto means when it's in the 8th house. I've already really lined it all out, but I've been enjoying adding this to our conversations. With Isabel M. Hickey, she's a classic Western writer. She infers that Pluto is this reincarnating strand of neuroprogrammed unconscious habits that we've always employed, in this case being in the 8th house. Gripping to the use of power, to manipulating others so that you, for the sake of oneself, for one's own resources, using others for the sake of your second house, instead of letting others be an enrichment of your second house. In a funny way. It's kind of how to flip this around. So you're not using power to manipulate people, although an 8th house Pluto will have to move people. We have these organized resources together. We need to put them somewhere, and we need to have a logical way of using, how do we research? How do we experience the best way to use our pooled resources or energies or identity as a group or what have you? The Pluto in you is going to manipulate everybody to say, this is what we should do with it. And sometimes you might be right. You have to be unembarrassed about being, and unapologetic about leading in a group and being a leader in order that the resources can be used well. But you need to do it in a way that's not manipulative, that shows valuable insight and truth, and is based on the value that you bring, not just the force that you enforce. when Pluto gets locked up in the 8th house in this way, and while it's manipulative and pushes and uses force, it actually wants to just be abundant. It wants things to happen of itself just because the person, you as a Pluto in the 8th house, want to be able to use your power based on what you've built from your own efforts and actions and the value that you have. So when you give a directive, people trust that it's coming from a root in a powerful sense of financial discernment and financial capacity and wisdom regarding group effort and dynamic for what's best for the group. And the only way to do that is to have a strong second house in yourself, as well as blending to the will of the collective. Hopefully this isn't too vague, but the point is that Isabel Hickey talks about using Minerva. The word Minerva is what happens when you successfully combine Pluto's place in the 8th house with its opposite, its 7th house aspect on the 2nd house, bringing self-value into group investment and using group investment to help fortify self-value. Let's see what Isabella Hickey says about it. This is Pluto in the 8th house. This is the 8th house is the true house of education, for it's concerned with progress of every kind, moral, mental, and spiritual. Psychedelic, past life, psychic complexes are involved in the 8th house. The 8th house is always important in charts of those strongly interested in movements of progress and reform, humanitarian movements and the like. Its gloomy title as the House of Death is appropriate only because death is the greatest step forward known to us at our present stage of evolution. If Pluto is badly aspected here in the 8th house, it makes it easy to choose the path of degeneration, if that is the way an individual can learn the most. It's a house of learning, of deeply forcing oneself to experience the lived reality of something. And if that has to come through, if it's badly aspected, then it makes it, the path of degeneration is the way that you'll learn the most, and so be it. You'll apply that path because you'll get the most experience that you need to get, and it could be ugly, but it will be Pluto in the 8th. But it need not be the path of degenerative de-evolution. With Pluto in this house, there will be no standing still. One has to die to the old self and undergo rebirth while still in the body. There are no misty flats or drifting to and fro. It's always this compulsive activity in many different places. It can mean a long life if the life force is not wasted. This can mean an exceptionally long life. If 8th house is well placed, 8th house is the house of longevity. And if you have good health and you aren't so compulsive that you leak energy and unnecessary anger and willfulness, then you can actually learn to conserve it even while you're dealing with other people. And you can use other people to draw your energy forward, so you have to expend less. This is Pluto at the highest caliber in the 8th house, at its best expression. Heavy afflictions, on the other hand, negative dimensions of Pluto in the 8th, could mean the degeneration of the energies through dissipation and sensuality. Too much Plutonian dissolution in others in the relationship and the enjoyment of the escape of the fusion with another person at the expense of one's own grip on their own life and resources and energies. This house represents the entrance to the next dimension. It rules the psychic senses and out-of-body experiences. If Pluto is well aspected to Neptune and Mars, the native may be clairvoyant, being in the 8th house. The groups that you're subliminally attached to, permeating from other lifetimes, other universes, other dimensions, and interconnecting with your intuition in this life, having nothing to do with this incarnation, but just permeating through. Subliminal forces can make you a clairvoyant. It's very interesting. No one but the person themselves can help this person with Pluto in this house come to victory over his appetites and desires. There must be no desire to control others, but a sincere desire to help others find and use their own resources. To not have the addictive idea to fuse with them at the resource level just because that has always gained you power in the past. You have to have a sincere desire to help others find and use their own resources, their own second house. Financial independence can come through a legacy. Being attached to a legacy of some other person, of a dad or of your dynasty or what have you, your family. The aspect between Pluto and Mars will be very important with Pluto in this house because the 8th house vibes to the tune of Mars and Scorpio. I would say it's more about Saturn. Any aspects to Pluto and Saturn, especially the health of Saturn in this chart, are going to ground the capacity to stay in the feeling of instability. If one uses others for one's own ends, especially through Mars, that's why they're saying Mars here, if you use others for your own ends, there are drastic and possibly violent repercussions. People will remember the vibes that you put out and the lack of care for their energy that you put out. It can come back to you in very repressive, debilitating, destructive ways. It could kill you, put you in jail, or at least give you some kind of torment that you might have given them will come back to you. With rebirth through regeneration comes the wisdom of Minerva. The death of the personality and the birth of the soul power is the promise of the higher side of Pluto. One who goes into the darkness to find the light. Insight, self-mastery, and the ability to stand alone, if need be, are the gifts of Minerva in this house. Very cool. It can be very tricky, very difficult, because of the nature of Pluto is 8th house related in the way that it is. The strength of Mars will help this energy to come through, especially the strength of the 8th house and Saturn. In my opinion, for this house, it's all about Saturn more than anything else. Saturn will give you the ability to endure through the promise that you've made to these other groups, and the embarrassment that can happen, and will make you keep appointments and organize yourself even when there's pressures of other people to be flaking out and not caring as much, even when they don't put as much Saturn, diligent, compassionate, selfless effort to the group project that you do. You can reprimand them, tell them in a mature, detached way that you're putting in this much effort and so you deserve to have this effort coming through. And if they're not going to put in the same amount of effort, then you can cut them out because maybe you're at a place where you have that authority. You need to be able to have the confidence to have that authority, have others trust you, communicate with others to zero in on the one person who's the weak link in the chain, have everybody communicate with them about that, and if they still don't change, have the authority, have the leadership to cut them out. Give them and be honest about how much they put in, give it back to them, and say sayonara, don't let the door hit you on the ass on the way out. All of these, being succinct, being prudent about giving money where it's due, taking money where, more about giving debts repaid, to the nth degree, even when you've been bitter and you hate this group, still give the money that people deserve for the work that you do, and that will cleanse the karma, keep your reputation clean, keep your karma clean, so anybody that works with you, when you finally do get on top of this Pluto, they will trust you because you will be trustworthy. It'll be in your mind. You will have a clean psychic complex so that people will be attracted to the strength and capacity that you have to make wonderful investments and long-term investments with you. It's the ideal Pluto that you will get at the end of things if you work it this way. So as usual, I can go on forever about it, but I think I've got to keep spinning, folks. So thank you so much for watching. That was Pluto in the 8th house. I'm Dustin Cormier with How to Rock Astrology. Like, subscribe, comment, do all the things. Let me know what you guys thought. And if you enjoyed this, especially if you have Pluto in the 8th house, if you feel so inclined, feel free to check out the start of this series, talking about the nature of Pluto in a way the 8th house, and giving Pluto credence in the context of transformation of the karma and putting life at its most useful meaning and purpose in a spiritual way, but even in just like, if you're not a spiritual person, the insights that this book shares towards living your best life internally, subjectively, what it all means. This book has really got a good grip on it, in my personal opinion. I digress. I love you, folks. Thanks for watching. Keep your eyes peeled, because there's always more stuff coming out in the world of How to Rock Astrology. For those watching on the live stream, feel free to keep watching, and at the end of this whole thing, we're going to talk about the aspects of Pluto.